Hi, my name's Clay Vagoda, and I'm here today with Dennis Gallagher for our first podcast of Gallagher's World. Dennis, I've known you for 35 years, and over the time I've called you all sorts of different things. Representative, senator, councilman, auditor, mentor, professor, grand marshal, friend. And I thought we'd start today by if you could sort of give us an overview of who you are and why it is that you have so much to teach us and to talk to us about.
I was born in this neighborhood here near Regis. I was born, my first year I was spent at 29th and Irving. My father was a member of the Denver Fire Department, along with his brother-in-law and his brother. And when I was 18, my dad asked the chief at the time, Ali Feldman, I think he was the first Jewish chief we ever had, said, should my son apply to be a fireman? He's 18. And his answer was, hell no. We've got too damn many Gallaghers on this fire department already. I could have brought a lawsuit if I'd have thought about it, but I didn't. I instead remembered his father, my grandfather, Bill Gallagher, who worked for the old Moffett Railroad, which is where Balfour is now, down on 15th Street near Union Station. And when he took the test, here he was, an Irish immigrant from Ireland, from County Sligo, William Butler Yates's county, and he takes the test to be a fireman or an engineer, and he gets 100%. Now the powers that be at the Moffett Railroad at that time said, this Irishman must have cheated. We're gonna make him take the test again, because nobody ever gets 100%, and this time we'll watch him. And so my grandfather takes the test again and gets 100% again, even with them watching him. And he got 100% again, and they said, maybe we need this Irishman after all on the railroad. And he was a member for a long time, and he lived 5 blocks from where we're sitting now, and at 48th and Quitman, the house is still there. I drive by and think of him and say a Hail Mary for him whenever I'm on Quitman Street. And he married Marie Davin, whose father and mother lived in Pueblo in 1905. I found them in the Pueblo phone book, and they were at 421 South Santa Fe, which is now a Slovenian bakery called Potica. So what do you think about that? We've come full ethnic circle. And so then my mother's people were Flahertys and O'Donovans, and they were from, my grandmother Flaherty was from County Cork, and she came up every day and walked from 25th and Hooker all the way up to 43rd and Quitman, and I got to know her very well. And she always kept in touch with the families in Ireland. And so when I got to go to Ireland, I stayed with them. We had a wonderful time. But my grandmother Flaherty was a charming woman, and one of my outstanding memories is when the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross in front of St. Dominic's Church, which was just behind their house on Hooker Street. It was on Grove Street, and she thought it was a sacrilege that anyone would burn the sacred cross in this neighborhood. And of course, the Klansmen, Anglo-Saxons all, were threatened by Irish, Italian, Jewish, and other Latino immigrants moving into the neighborhood. And similar to what you heard in Charlottesville when the anti-Semitic Klan members were shouting, the Jews shall not replace us. These people are crazy, absolutely crazy, as were the people in the Klan days in Denver in the 1920s, when the mayor and several of the councilmen were Klansmen, and lots of the legislature. So that's a little bit about my background and how I enjoyed growing up in this neighborhood. I went to Holy Family School, uh, run by the Sisters of Loretto, and they taught me a love of the English language, how to write a good English sentence. And then in high school, I took Latin from Sister Miriam Gerard, and I think of her every day and thank her for the wonderful gift she gave me to appreciate Latin words. And then when I went to Regis, first class I signed up for was classical Greek. And I came back and told her that she didn't want to teach me Greek in high school. She said I wasn't ready. And I said, as a freshman at Regis, to which I got a scholarship from Holy Family School, and I minored in Latin and Greek, which means I took a Latin class and a Greek class every semester, and it changed my life. I got to read Cicero and his attacks against the tyrants and his preservation of the Roman Republic. And so that's a little of my background. I so enjoyed being at Holy Family, and I think of them often as I think of my life, and I appreciate all the sacrifice my mother and father and the nuns at Holy Family did for me to help me through on my life's journey.
So Dennis, most people think of you from your public service and the 44 years of elected service that you've done here in the city and county of Denver. So can you give us a little background about what got you into politics, why public service was so important, and all the different offices you've held over that time?
Well, Clay, I had a wonderful tutoring here in North Denver, and my first vote was for John F. Kennedy in 1960. Now you'll know how old I am. I was 21 in 1960. And I was assigned by Dolores Dickman, our Democratic captain, to try to get as many votes from Holy Family Parish, my home parish, as I could for John F. Kennedy, because he was having a hard time in Colorado. I don't have to tell you, Colorado statewide still is suspicious of Catholics in office. They don't want the Pope telling them how to vote. And although I think they'd find this Pope pretty liberal, and how dare he call for something so radical as feed my lambs, feed my sheep. And but anyway, so my first endeavor, I saw at the parish Mr. Michael Kennedy, who had a family in Ireland and a family here. He was from County Galway. His wife was from Galway also, I believe. And they had about 8 kids here in America. Then they had some kids in Ireland who stayed in Ireland when they immigrated. And so I saw Mr. Kennedy, a milkman, the driver of a milk truck. And I said, well, Mr. Kennedy, I hope you can vote for your namesake who's running for president. He said, oh, Dennis, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a Republican. And so I thought, oh my Lord, my first attempt to try to get a vote for John F. Kennedy, and I failed. So I came back and I reported to Dolores that Mr. Kennedy at Holy Family Parish was not going to vote for John F. Kennedy for president because he was a Republican and all of his kids are Republicans. And so Dolores called the campaign in Boston, and a friend of hers was working on the campaign, Joe Dolan, who was very active here, but he was on Kennedy's staff. They sent a handwritten letter from John F. Kennedy to Michael Kennedy at the 50th anniversary dinner of Mary and Michael Kennedy's anniversary dinner at Holy Family Parish. And he came later and he saw me and he said, Dennis, did you have the Kennedys send me a letter for my anniversary? And I said, yes, we did. We're still asking you for the vote because we don't want to see you vote for anybody but a Kennedy. And he said, well, I got to tell you, I've reconsidered, Dennis. Even though I'm a Republican, I have changed my mind that if that young man, that handsome young Irishman, can take time to send a letter to me on my wedding anniversary, that he's got time for me, I'm going to give him the vote and all the Kennedys are going to vote for him. So my efforts were not for naught. And although, as you remember, Colorado did not go for Kennedy, and I actually had people at the door tell me when I was going door to door for him that they would never vote for an Irish Catholic at the door because they didn't want the Pope telling the president how to vote. So that's how I got my start, through Dolores Dickman, a wonderful Democratic captain who, I wish she were with us today. She'd be turning over in her grave seeing what happened in the last 4 years, but she really kept us all on the straight and narrow. And when I ran for state rep, she was my helper and my sponsor. It was wonderful.
So you started out as a state representative at the Capitol, and you were there for how many terms?
For 2 terms. I was 4 years.
And then
I had a wonderful time. It was when Ruben Valdez was the state representative just south of me. And then we had representatives like Betty Benavides, who ran the next time from Lincoln Park area down along Colfax and Auraria. And I'll never forget the first time she and I went doorbelling together. And we agreed that if a Hispanic person came to the door, she would start the conversation. If an Anglo came to the door, I would start the conversation. What a terrible, we were so innocent and so naive, we didn't know what we were doing. And we should have done it exactly the opposite. But it shows you how insecure we were a little bit in our early years. But she won. She was the first Hispanic female elected, and she did wonderful work. And then I got to serve in the House for 4 years, and then 20 years in the Colorado Senate.
it's a long time.
It is.
And then from the Senate, you moved to the city and county?
Yes, Bill Scheitler was our councilman, and he unfortunately got macular degeneration. I hope I'm not betraying a trust by sharing that, but he could not run again, and so I ran in his place. I think there were 7 or 8 candidates. Somebody called it Dennis Gallagher and the 7 Dwarves who were running, but I don't want to cast aspersion on dwarves. And but I won. I won the first time round. Interestingly enough, Clay, I had already endorsed Wellington Webb before I even knew I was running for city council, when I was only in the Senate. And then, of course, I won the first time outright, thanks to the efforts of a good many people. And so then, of course, we at Wellington wanted me to be sure to endorse him again since he was running in a runoff election. And of course I did, and he won, and he was a pretty good mayor.
Well, over time, I'm going to want to get into the various different issues that you have basically worked on and made your own over the course of your career. But let's keep getting the chronology down. So 8 years as a city councilman.
Yeah, 2 terms.
And then on to the auditor's office.
Yes, and I want to share with you, Clay, that I was for 16 years on the State Legislative Audit Committee up at the state when I was in the Senate. And I enjoyed the audit committee immensely. It was the only nonpartisan committee at the legislature, and I actually served as chair several times. And that's where I learned about what's called performance auditing. And it's where you actually, as an auditor, get in and study the performance of the agency, not just the financials. And normally the financials will tell you if there's a problem in an agency, which you're always, as an auditor, interested in. But how is the agency performing for the people? Is it fulfilling its mission? Is it serving the people? Is it functioning? What does the membership of the agency think of the leadership of the agency? Issues like that are what you get at And so when I became auditor, I did a lot of performance audits. We called it the Denver model, and they worked very well. We made a lot of good changes.
And so you spent 12 years as auditor, and the Denver model became nationally recognized.
Yes, we had many other cities that approached us and told us that they wanted to follow our lead. And we talked about performance auditing. And I gave a lot of talks around the country and also here in Denver to auditing groups. Even though I am not an auditor, I do not have a CPA, and the CPAs have a special deal with the state. They got a bill passed saying you can only say you're an auditor if you're a CPA. So I never crossed that line. I never said I was an auditor, but I am not for changing the Denver Auditor's Office to CPAs only. Have you ever dealt with CPAs? I think that last question I have tells you why we don't need a change there.
So that takes us through 44 years of public service. And that was 2015 was your last time you were term limited out of the auditor's office. So what have you been doing with yourself for the last 5.5 years?
Well, I've had a wonderful time. During the coronavirus sequester, I have gotten back to reading, and I went up on my second floor and found my copies of Virgil in Latin and Homer in Greek. And I brought them down with my Latin and Greek dictionaries, and I'm trying to make it through Virgil and Homer again, and it's wonderful. I try to recite it out loud as the ancient Greeks and Romans did. And then also, in my later years, I've taken up icon painting and egg tempera, no acrylics. And behind me are quite a few of the icons that I've painted. I'm working on my 8th now, St. Tikhon of Moscow, who actually visited Denver and helped consecrate that little Orthodox church in Globeville. And so I've done St. Michael, St. Gabriel, St. Cyril and Methodius. And then also I've continued my interest in calligraphy. When I went to Holy Family School, I can remember Sister Marcellus, I believe was her name, my 2nd grade teacher, or 1st grade teacher. And there were still inkwells in the upper right-hand side of the desk when I went to Holy Family School. It was the last year that they ever offered any training in the copperplate quill, inkwell writing, and I took to it like a bird on the wing. And I still to this day remember that. And I also picked up italic calligraphy, which is medieval calligraphy, when I studied medieval Irish literature at Catholic University, many years later in graduate school. And so I've continued my work in calligraphy, and people get a big kick out of receiving a message in calligraphy. And when I was in the auditor's office, I wrote out the Athenian Oath in classical Greek with an English translation on the other side, and people would post those on their office walls. So those are a couple of things that I've been doing.
So Dennis, over the course of the time I've known you, you've always been an elected official, but you also had the honorarium as professor. And so can you tell us about your time at Regis?
Yes, I began teaching at Regis in 1967, and this is after getting my MA at Catholic University of America in speech and English literature. And I had a wonderful time. I also taught Latin, and I remember teaching at the same time as Father Bernard Karst, who was the Dean of Students at Regis, a wonderful older, must have been in his 80s at the time, and we would have our classes together, and then we'd always walk over to the student center and have a cup of coffee. It was just wonderful getting to know Father Karst, other than as disciplinarian, which he always was. And then, so I've been teaching at Regis since 1967, and I taught Latin, Greek, speech, media, persuasion, argumentation, rhetoric, uh, and courses like that. And Regis was always very kind to me. They gave me leave to go to the legislature the second semester, and then I would teach full load the first semester. But I taught over 7,000 students at Regis. I had a wonderful time. And, you know, I got to tell you, a couple of years ago at one of the Regis reunions, a young woman came up to me and she said, "You don't know me." And she introduced herself. She was from California. And she said, "There was a day at Regis when I was ready to quit, and I just happened to be her speech teacher. And I told her that she's going to do great things someday, and I had great confidence in her." She said that gave her courage to stick it out and stay in school. And now she owns 5 companies. And you know, I forgot to get her name so that I could approach her for a donation for Regis and the Denver Center for International Studies. I should have. But anyway, but you never know as a teacher what things you do that might influence somebody. So I always remember that and tried to always give a compliment if at all costs, because people in this world today need to have their confidence built up, and a compliment never hurts.
Though I do remember, Dennis, that you had a way of teaching people speech that involved a marbles in a bucket.
Oh, yes, yes. And I always tried to get people over saying, you know, various things like that. And so I would drop marbles in a little brass bucket every time somebody said, or you know. And then I'd count them at the end, and I said, "You have to give $2.12 to the Jesuit Mission Fund to be able to get over your nervousness." And eventually people saw the humor in it and just relaxed, and never said, or you know. Although I run across a lot of teachers at Regis and elsewhere who every other word is a you know. It's sort of like watching the sports guys on the television, you know, like, you know, all those things that people do when they're nervous. So, but I had a wonderful time. People told me when they took my speech class that they relaxed, and it was their number one fear. Did you know in the United States, the number one fear among citizens is giving a speech? And it was my goal to get the people to relax when they communicated. And so I always tried to do that. And I had a wonderful time teaching. Happiest days, which was wonderful.
Dennis, you talked about the Athenian Oath, and that you presented all of your new employees with a copy of it when they came to work for you. What actually is the Athenian Oath?
Clay, the Athenian Oath is an oath that a young man would take on his 18th birthday in Athens and swear before the whole assembly of the people. It was a wonderful oath. In those days, of course, only males took it, which was a bit of a problem when you look at things from our vantage point today.
So Dennis, why a podcast? Why are we doing this today?
Well, a lot of people, Clay, have asked me to write my memoirs, but being a member of the public, of people who believe in the oral tradition, podcasts allows you to fall back on the oral tradition and speak your memoirs, speak your memories. And that's why I want to do a podcast to cover all of the unusual circumstances, characters, people's dilemmas that I faced in life, and be able to share the learning experience with people who might enjoy hearing such stories. Energy to be a better city, a city more beautiful than we found it. And then they would swear on the gods themselves. And that is the Athenian Oath. And I think it's a great oath. I don't know of any oath more beautiful than the ancient Athenian Oath, which brought them to be one of the greatest democracies in all the world.
And so that was your philosophy of the auditor's office?
It was my philosophy in the auditor's office that the auditor's office and state representative, state senator, councilman tries to make our city more beautiful than we found it. Isn't that a beautiful oath? I like that. I wish we swore an oath like that, given all the fugly development that we've got going all over the neighborhoods.
So Dennis, I know that you've also kept busy in politics since you've been technically retired. And I know this last election cycle you were very involved in trying to defeat Amendment B, which went after the amendment to the Constitution that bears your name. So will you tell us about the Gallagher Amendment and how that happened and why you felt Amendment B was so bad for Colorado?
The Gallagher Amendment, since its enactment by the people in 1982, saved $32 billion in property taxes that would have had to be paid by residential properties. And I am very distressed to read in the Denver Business Magazine that property taxes in Denver have gone up 164%, not only because of increased values, which causes an increase in property taxes, but also because of all kinds of other smaller increments that are added onto the property taxes. And one of the lies that they told during the campaign, where they spent $7 million saying, oh, you won't, to get a property tax increase, you'll have to go to a vote of the people. Bovis excrementum, as the Latins say. It's not true. And now we're seeing these increases, and eventually we will see increases like we have in New Jersey, where property taxes are $10,000 and $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month, another house payment. It's not fair, and we will see people suffering because of this. And in Colorado, we do not want to see people who are only millionaires able to afford a home.
So going forward in the future, every week on Gallagher's World, Dennis will be applying himself to a different subject. It'll be politics, it'll be history, it'll be talking about his art, talking about his calligraphy, talking about interesting and unique characters he's met over the course of the years. You can forward any questions you have or thoughts you have to dgallaghers.world@gmail.com, or you can become a friend of Dennis's on Facebook, former Denver Auditor Dennis Gallagher, and we look forward to seeing you every week. And thank you for joining us today. And Dennis, looking forward to an interesting ongoing conversation with you.